Hello and welcome to the 100 Jobs Project. I'm your host, Katie Monsingant, and I am so excited to have someone that I used to work with on the show today. We're talking to Ari, who is the VP of Digital at MSL, which is part of Publicis Group. And for anyone who is not familiar with the whole wide world of marketing social comms, this is just that influencer marketing social comms. Ari's up in New York City and has had a really, really cool career. So I'm excited to learn from her today.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you. I know that it's often, rare to be able to chat on a podcast with someone you actually know in real life. So this is such a treat. But yeah, I've lived in New York for nearly 12 years now, which I never expected. I moved here to work in agency life and I'm still in agency life. So I guess it's fun to throw out there as well. And I was actually born in Hawaii and grew up in Singapore and Hong Kong before moving here. So big cities is kind of my thing, probably why I've been here for so long. When I'm not working, I love to cook, I love to travel, and I love to kind of plan my wedding, which is my latest venture. So
Amazing. And we actually didn't cover this when we were just chatting and catching up before the call, but when is your wedding? Like, how long do you have before you've got to have it all together?
scary to think that you have to have it all together by a certain point. Do have the date and the venue, so we're kind of halfway there, I guess, from what I've heard. But it's October 2nd of next year, so we have just about 10 months. It'll be in Malta, which is a country in Europe. So doing it from New York has been a little challenging, but mostly really fun.
Have you been to Malta before and have you seen the venue in person and everything?
Yeah, so working in PR and influencer and social, I feel like you're used to just being go, go, go. So I do this a lot with my personal life, for better or worse. My fiance loves to make fun of me for it. But we did a trip to Malta. We were actually working remote. My manager was so sweet and let us work remote for a week. So we did do 14 venue viewings every morning. Because of the time difference, we were able to kind of squeeze them all in and then work from like 3 o'clock ish local time in Malta. So, yeah, did a week of just a bunch of venue viewings, found our dream spot. Thankfully, we both agreed to which one was our favorite. So, that was a big challenge because I knew that we both had different things we were looking for, but thankfully found the place.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like such a dream. And I'm so glad that you were actually able to go see the venue before booking it because I have talked to a handful of people who are like, this is the venue. We can't go until like a little later on in the process. They have to book it
Yeah,
without like seeing it actually. And that just stresses me out. So
same.
it sounds like it's going to be beautiful. October is like the most gorgeous time of year, in my opinion, to get married.
Thank you.
So really, really excited for you.
Thank you so much.
Now, we could chat about wedding stuff all day long, but that is not what the people are here for.
Yeah.
So I wanna get to know you just a little bit more. I've got a few questions for you.
Ooh, love that.
Now, you've worked in influencer marketing a lot. I would love to know if you have any go-to comfort creators right now or just in general.
I do love working with this one phenomenal agent, and she's going to love that I'm giving her a shout out. But Ashley Fox of Iconic Fox, everyone she works with, I just think is the best human being possible. They're all so real. And I just love how she operates too as an agent. She's very much about let's talk it out, figure out how we can meet, halfway if we need to, but really just takes the time to understand the person working with them. She's hired more people now, and they all seem to embody that as well. And so I've worked with a lot of her talent over the years, and I feel like recently one of my clients is KitchenAid, and we've worked with Chef Riley a lot, and he's been just really phenomenal. For a shoot we had recently, he showed up. He got on a plane to Chicago after his dog bit him, and he had to be in the ER and got stitches, and he still showed up. So I think it just says a lot about the commitment he has to his craft and how he really values his relationships with agents and agencies that bring him work. So I thought that was just like really heartwarming. I've had the pleasure of going on a lot of brand trips with influencers over the years too. So I've become really good friends with many of them. I mean, I had a Hard Rock Hotel trip with Sophia Bella, who I adore. She's just so funny and so real. And I've also really had a lot of fun working with Amy Kelly recently too. Got on a trip with her. She was also on this KitchenAid shoot with us. She's just one of those people who totally gets it.
In my opinion, one of the things that I loved about being in the influencer world a little bit, and you have worked with influencers far more so than I have. But when you actually meet people and get to work with them and they are just like the sweetest, kindest, most genuine, smart people,
Yep.
you kind of say, wow, because from an outside perspective, sometimes there's this veneer of influencers are self serving or kind of dumb. And then when you work with people, you were like, that is absolutely not the case. I will be consuming all of this. So thank you. Thank you for sharing those.
Of course. Yeah, there's never a shortage of options of great creators out there. So, yeah, love that.
Truly. And there's always new ones coming into play.
100%.
This is a little different, but this is like a real life working girl question. What do you usually eat for lunch? Is it different every day, or do you have like
Wow.
a go-to meal prep, something that you are prepping for a quick bite?
So it's funny you say that because I am the most boring person when it comes to lunch, but when it comes to dinner, my fiance and I go all out. We love to cook. For lunch, I feel like I have a couple go-tos. I This is so funny because I was just telling my fiance the other day that even though I've lived in New York for 12 years, one thing has not changed, which is that I still shop at Trader Joe's because groceries are expensive and Trader Joe's has always got me covered. So I love their little frozen meals. They're just so easy to toss into my work bag and I take them to the office, heat it up when I've got a break between meetings. And that just honestly is my comfort lunch go to. But I do love to go to Cava for a healthy bowl if I feel like treating myself and leaving the office and going on a walk, which is always a good idea. I am half Japanese, so sometimes I crave some Japanese food when I'm feeling like I need a comfort meal as well. So I did recently go, there's a market called Tenichi Market near the office in New York, and they have a couple locations around the city. They always do a really good bento box that's like $10 and doesn't get much better than that. So I did recently go there and that was also delicious.
Amazing. I mean, New York City definitely has some good food, so I'm glad that you've been able to find a few little hideaways there that are good. Also, thank you so much for being real about Trader Joe's frozen lunches because we've all been there.
No, I love it. And they always come out with new things. So, I love to look out for the new item labels and you can't go wrong with trying them out. So, I do appreciate that about them. There's always something for everybody.
Same, and it feels really seasonal too. I get really excited for all of the seasonal shifts. We're in winter now. They're just putting out all their winter stuff, and I could not be happier.
I fall for them every time. I mean, they have the new candles, the new hand soaps.
I've leaned into it now rather than hating to admit it, and I live for it. Okay, one more question. You're in New York, and New York is a place known for great nightlife. Would you rather prefer a night out or a night in?
I am so unpredictable when it comes to how my energy is going to be. So I consider myself pretty outgoing. But in terms of how I recharge, I do like to be home for at least an hour before bed by myself to just kind of like decompress. It's just how who I am and how I've been operating for at least a few years now. I think when I was younger, I could really go out until 4 a.m. And I've had those nights out in New York where you come home in a cab and it's 4 a.m. and you get your little like halal guys, like, lamb over rice meal at 4 a.m. and it's the best thing ever. And it was so fun. But I think that the older I've gotten, I really appreciate kind of the balance. I feel like it just really depends on the day. And if I'm at a wedding, for example, or if I'm at an event where I've just like mentally prepared myself to be out late, I can hang, I'll be like the last person on the dance floor. But yeah, if it's a night when I'm just kind of hanging out in the city and by myself or hanging out with my fiance and just kind of taking it easy.
I like that though. You really do need to have balance, and obviously I have a kid now, but my life has shifted a lot in the past few years. I'm into the idea of seasons. There's a season for nights out. There's a season for nights in, and you can have both. You just got to balance them a little bit.
Agree. Yeah, you can't have too much of one thing because then you won't appreciate it. That's my philosophy with everything in life.
Yes. So now the main event for these icebreakers is this what's in your work bag question. I feel like it gives people a great glimpse into, what your work life is like and also what's important to you, what you like. So if there's 3 or 4 things that you're throwing in your work bag lately or keeping at your desk, we'd love to hear it.
So I've had the same fragrance for about 15 years now. I discovered it on my first trip to Paris, and one of my best friends, who is going to be my maid of honor, she introduced me to this place called Fragonard. And ever since then, I've just used their same fragrance. It's the Belle Cherie, if anyone ever wants to find it themselves. It's a very beautiful, subtly sweet, but also like woodsy fragrance. And that's totally my type of fragrance. So I've had that in my bag. They give you this little like travel sized version of it that you can actually refill with your bigger bottle, which I think is genius. So I've had that in my work bag consistently because you just never know when you have to freshen up or go to a client event or dinner. So it's very handy. I always have a Tide pen to go as well because I just have had too many instances where I've had lunch and maybe the pasta sauce gets on your dress and you just have to quickly clean it up, and it never fails. And then I also love to have water. I know this is so basic, but I have this water bottle that I should have probably just put on this desk and shown you, but it's a very beautiful brown water bottle. It's from Amazon, but it's from, I think, a Scandinavian company, and I'm not going to butcher the name, so I won't say it, but it's just very easy to hold, and it keeps me hydrated throughout the day because I found that the days when I'm really grumpy at work, I'm either hungry or thirsty. So if I can at least deal with both of those things by having a lunch and hydrating, then I'm able to tackle anything the day has ahead of me.
Well, you're definitely gonna have to send me a link to this water bottle or a photo later or something. We'll link it if anyone is interested, but it sounds darling. Anything that has a Scandinavian design, I'm like, I know this is gonna be a good. And heaven forbid a girl wanna be hydrated. I mean, those are great things to keep in your work bag. So practical and also a little cute. I love the fragrance thing too. I was talking to someone years ago and she was saying like when she was working from home, like she needed to put shoes on because that was how she signaled to herself like
Mm.
this is like I'm working now, I have shoes on. And for me it's always fragrance, like a little spray of something and it's like okay, yeah, we're down to business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me it's that, and also putting on like jewelry. It's like, okay, I've tried,
Yep.
even if it's a day I'm working from home, it just feels like you're a little bit more put together. So I totally get that.
Yes, and you show up much better on a Zoom call if you've got a little some cute little jewels in your ears.
It's a good icebreaker too, because sometimes you meet a new client or a new influencer, and it gives them something to comment on if you're just meeting for the first time.
Well, now that we've got some of those icebreakers out of the way and both me and everyone listening knows Ari a little bit better, I would love to hear about your life. I think I know you a lot in a career sense and a professional sense, but I don't know a ton about how you grew up and what your family life was like and how you got interested in this line of work. So if you could speak to that a little bit, that would be amazing.
So I was born in Hawaii, and I think that my parents had always traveled around for work, and everyone then always asked what my dad did, and it really wasn't glamorous. He was working for a Tokyo based Japanese optical company, and he was a manager at these different branches. So, back in the 80s and 90s, it was a lot more common for Japanese companies to send them around. And we just happened to be stationed or positioned in Hawaii. And so, lucky me, I was born there halfway through their 7 year stint in Hawaii, which I'm still very jealous of because when you're 0 to 4 years old, you don't really remember anything. So I like to say I'm from Hawaii, but I don't actually have a lot of, memories, core memories in Hawaii, unfortunately, but that's where my story began. My sister is 8 years older, so she got to experience all the 7 glorious years in Hawaii, and she tells me a lot about how it was just a beautiful time. She was born in Japan, which is where my dad is from. My mom is from Hong Kong, which is where my parents met. And so after Hawaii, we moved to Singapore for 4 years. I went to an Australian international school. I loved it there. I was so, so sad. I think I cried every day after we left Singapore to move to Hong Kong. Eventually, I was very happy to be in Hong Kong, but I think when you're 8 and you get moved, it just feels a lot more dramatic than it is. Yeah, so I eventually found my footing in Hong Kong. Loved it, made my new friends, went to a Canadian international school there, which I understand makes me sound very privileged, but we actually grew up quite like middle class, living in all those different places. I was able to really understand like how people are, like no matter what the culture is, no matter where you are. I do think that we're fundamentally all human beings and we all love to connect with each other, and there's always something that you can find that is common ground, and that's communication. And so I think that when I went to college, I had a couple different options, and I really loved at the time reading stories from Roald Dahl, and I really wanted to be a writer and I wanted to be a journalist. That's kind of how I decided to take the journalism school path when I went to University of Oregon, got into the honors college, thankfully, and that's kind of where I was able to meet all these different types of people because the honors college was kind of like a melting pot of every type of person possible. And it was wonderful because I got to meet a lot of different people who just had different perspectives on things. And that really got me interested in what is it that makes people click and what is it that makes them want to do things. And so I guess that kind of, in a weird way, led me to think about pivoting from journalism to PR. It was fun because I got to try out so many different internships. And through that, I was like, okay, you know what? PR is what I want to do. So that's what I graduated with. And then I found an internship in New York. I think one of the things with coming from an international family is like I knew nobody in Oregon. I knew nobody in New York. I just knew nothing about how work life works in the US. And so it was kind of a really big challenge for me, but I think I've always been someone who likes a challenge. I've always loved that I've had to kind of figure it out on my own. And there were days, don't get me wrong, when it was really hard and I cried a lot with rejections from jobs and all of that. But eventually I found a place in New York that wanted to hire me as a summer intern. Then they hired me full time after that. And the rest is kind of history.
Wow, so much there. I mean, you just covered like this whole incredible journey in like 3 minutes, but that was years and years of work and probably stressing over these really big life decisions. I mean, just from the get go, Hong Kong to Oregon to New York is a major change. I mean, what was it that really brought you to Oregon? And then why, when you were in Oregon, were you like, New York is it?
Well, Oregon was actually a wild card for me. I am so, so happy to have had my education there because I met really amazing people there. But it was never my first choice. I mean, growing up in Hong Kong, all of my references for the US were California or New York. And New York just felt so far at the time, having lived in Asia all my life. So West Coast felt more attainable. I applied to a bunch of schools in California and Washington too. And then Oregon was kind of added on because my sister actually went there and she had nothing but great things to say. And she thought that it would be a good challenge for me to be somewhere that was completely different because up until then I had only lived in big cities. And so she thought it would be a good place for me to kind of like discover myself, but also it just happened to be where they had a good journalism school, which at the time I was very convinced I wanted to be a journalist. And also, I got some great scholarships. So it just made the most sense. And then I ended up doing an internship. So I was a little crazy in college. I had probably 10 internships at one point.
Very, that's
It was,
so many.
it was really wild. I would not recommend it. I think I overdid it, but well, I'd say I wouldn't recommend it with like a caveat, which is that I do think it helped me quickly understand what I do and don't love. I definitely had a reality moment where it was like, you know what? I could spend an extra hour on this paper, or I could spend that hour going out there and doing an internship. And I chose to kind of put my get my feet wet with different real life. I say real life with air quotes because like I was still a college student, but I figured that it would make sense to go out and try a couple things. So that's why I got myself into all these internships. One of them was a Rent the Runway campus ambassador role. And that was kind of like one of my fun things that I did where essentially I just did trunk shows, which is basically like Rent the Runway would send me a couple pieces and then I would show them to my friends, to my sorority sisters, to whoever would be interested really. I had to figure out how to use Facebook and create like Facebook events and like recruit people to come to my trunk shows that way. So it was really a good experience for my career. And at the time, I didn't realize that. But Then through that program, they had an opportunity. I had the opportunity to come to New York and do, I think it was like 3 days where you could meet the Rent the Runway team. You could go to their like little conference that was like all the campus ambassadors coming together. And it was my first time in New York City. I remember coming here and thinking there's something about this city that just feels so familiar. Something about the energy was just so me, I guess, and I think that that's where I subconsciously decided it's New York or nowhere after college.
That still is really, like, a long way to come mileage-wise. Is most of your family in the States? Are they all scattered all over?
So my parents retired and they moved from Hong Kong to Japan. My dad is from a very tiny island. I think when I say I'm like partially from Japan, people think I live in a glorious place in Kyoto or Tokyo, but it's really the middle of nowhere. That's where they've retired and they live there full time now. My sister actually married a Canadian. She was in Vancouver for a while after going to Oregon as well, and she moved to Hokkaido about 3 years ago with her family. She's got 2 boys, and my fiance's family is in England, so it makes it really challenging to get the family together and figure out where we're going for the holidays and such.
I was just talking to my grandpa this past weekend about, his life much earlier, and when he was, I guess when my dad was young, they lived in Germany for a little while, and all of their family was in the States, like, toward the West Coast, and it was all just, like, letters was the correspondence that they had, and, of course, it takes weeks and weeks to get from the West all the way to Germany, and I was just thinking how grateful I am for this time because my family is all in Montana, across the country, not actually in separate countries like your family, but technology is such a blessing. It's also really interesting to hear from you where like your family is scattered because that's something that is so important to so many people is to be really, really close to family. And so it's just interesting and unique to see how people are able to maintain that closeness without necessarily being physically close.
And it is true that you make family where you are because I think that's one of the beautiful things about having to be far from your family is that it does almost force you to create your own community. So you have your community right around you where you are, and then you still have your community where your family is. That never goes away, which is also the beauty of family.
Lately, now that I have a 2-year-old, my husband and I have chatted and we're like, it would be really nice. Like we see the value of being close to family because we have other friends that are able to have their parents over to babysit on a random Thursday night if they want to go catch a movie or something. And we don't have that, but I do feel like when we go and visit family, like we try to be very intentional about being present and maximizing our time there and having fun traditions and other things that we might take for granted if we were near all the time. So there's definitely benefits to both, and you just figure it out as you go. But anyway, back to work stuff. So you had this really cool Rent the Runway experience that really led you to New York, and you said you then landed a job at an influencer agency. Is that am I missing something in there, or is that kind of your first job and foray into the New York working world?
Without knowing it, that was my intro to influencers, which at the time they were bloggers. One of my first accounts that I worked on was GameStop, which is also, oh my gosh, like such a blast from the past. But I had the best time working with them. And they and my manager at the time, who I owe a lot of my New York success to because he really took a chance on me. I mean, he had no idea who I was, but he really kind of gave me so much freedom as an intern to raise a hand and come up with ideas. And one of my ideas was working with bloggers who were accepting at the time gift cards. I remember it was like I think $100 gift cards, and we gave these bloggers gift cards to write about the latest releases on GameStop, like all the new games that were coming out. And so without knowing it, yeah, that was influencer work. But that was my first job.
So that became a job, and it sounds like you just kept working with influencers. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually ended up kind of focusing on PR for a couple of years after that first agency. But then I got exposed to working with social media and like creating content calendars for owned social channels. And then I kind of got back into the influencer space. I think about 8 years ago, it's when I kind of like consciously made that decision to focus on the digital space and move away from earned PR. But ironically, the agency I'm at right now is a PR agency first and foremost. So it's kind of like a full circle where you can't escape the interconnectivity of it all now. I think like influencers influence media, which is earned media, but it also influences paid media, and paid media influences what's, trendy and social. So it's all this like web of everything kind of coming together now, which is why I think I'm back at a PR agency doing digital work.
And times have certainly changed. Your story about giving people $100 GameStop gift cards, like, pushed me back to my early days. I worked at an agency for a little while when I was in Utah, and at the time we were, yeah, finding bloggers, finding people. Like, one of our clients was an essential oil company, and we're like, "Hey, want to trade some essential oils?" And you really can't do that anymore. But it's really exciting to see how things have grown for not just bloggers, but now influencers and tastemakers, actually getting some compensation for their influence and for their time. So it sounds
Yeah.
like you have really been able to be a part of that and see that grow, both from the lens of being on the blogger side to being on the PR side to being on the social side. And now it's all wrapped up.
I think there's been so much conversation too in the industry around equitable pay, and rightfully so. And it's almost like what we saw with Hollywood actors, where they, started to really kind of push for more transparency and more, closing of the gap with pay. I think we're seeing that happen with influencers, and it's only going to continue to, mature as an industry. I don't think influencers are going anywhere anytime soon, at least. I remember the first influencer agency I ever worked for. They would always say like, well, it's the Wild West. It's the Wild West, and like there are no rules. And I look back at that now and I kind of chuckle because there are so many rules now, and the challenges that they're getting written every single day and rewritten every single day with just how fast paced we are as a society, but also the space is, with it being, social first. I think things just move at the speed of light. So that is something that I love about it, though, is that you're always kind of kept on your toes. You're never fully comfortable because there's always something new to figure out.
And you always have to make sure, like, there's this legal aspect and element to it that I always found really interesting. I loved some of my, like, media law courses in school, and for a while too, I considered going down the legal rabbit hole, but you always have to be up to date with what the FTC is sharing, and with different ways to protect yourself as an agent for a client, or there's just a lot of legal stuff that you have to be up to speed with, and making sure that you're addressing an appropriate way too. So it's not just the whole world of social and influence, but you gotta keep tabs on a few other things too.
When I first started working in influencer, a lot of people kind of rolled their eyes at it because it was that like silly fun thing that people were starting to realize is a real profession. And yeah, I do think that it's going to change. I mean, I'm hearing that people are going to my school to major in influencer and social media marketing now, which is crazy to think about.
Wow.
But yeah, I do think it's going to only become more and more of a professional route.
One little, like, caveat here. I don't know that we necessarily mentioned at the start, but Ari and I are connected because we used to work together. When I was at Marriott, Ari was one of our agency partners, and she helped us send influencers all over the world. And so it was my job a little bit, but it's like Ari's full-time area of expertise. Love to know though, I mean, so you are working at an agency that is part of the Publicis Group, which is very, very well known and highly regarded within this industry. How did you get there?
My very first agency was actually rather large, but since then I had kind of found my home in these boutique agencies where, and when we say boutique agency, for anyone who's listening who isn't familiar, it's when you're kind of like a smaller agency where typically you only have like maybe one or two, max three offices. You're usually not international. It's usually like regional or just, national to the US or whichever country you're in. And typically you specialize in doing like one or two things really well. And I think that I got to a point around like my eighth or ninth year where I started to really think about what was next. And I think that there were two potential routes if I wanted to stay within this world, one being going brand side and one being going to a larger agency. And I think that when I was starting to look at jobs on the brand side, I realized that to be in a marketing role, because that's the most common opening that you'd see for someone with a background like mine, it really requires you to understand how different channels work together. And I realized that a big gap in my knowledge and my experience was that I didn't really know how all these channels work together. I knew anecdotally how they do, or knew from seeing it in articles and just following people on LinkedIn, but I didn't really know it firsthand. And I really wanted to understand how influencer, how social media, how even PR like influences the rest of the marketing space. And so that's really what pushed me to start looking at opportunities at a larger network like Publicis. I'm very lucky to work on a couple accounts where I might be with MSL, which is like one of many agencies, and then I get paired with other experts within different fields within other agencies under Publicis. So I might be working with someone who's a commerce expert. I might be working with someone who does out of home ads. I might be working with someone who does something completely different and is just doing brand strategy and creative. And I get to see how we can all help each other out, and how everything that we each do is so important to make the campaign successful.
It's so important to take a good hard look at where you actually are at every few years and evaluate where there are holes in your experience. And do you want to fill those holes, or do you want to be intentional about going in a different direction? Identifying those holes and then finding experiences to fill that not only will help you become a much more well rounded person, but it's also a great story to tell future employers too of, hey, I had this and I realized XYZ was lacking. And so, look, I did it. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for you. It's a part of selling yourself. A few questions about agency life. How many clients are you typically working with?
Depends on the size of the scope of the client. So, what I mean by that is some clients might come in with a very specific short term project, like a product launch or a season campaign, whereas some might come in with like a what we call a retainer, which is like a year-long commitment to working with the agency. Sometimes it's even longer than that. So, it depends on how many of retainer clients I'm on, which typically require more time, more in-depth knowledge around that brand, and those clients typically kind of expect that the people working on the business really understand the business, whereas those campaigns are a lot easier to handle when it's kind of like you're in and out really quickly, so you can maybe take on more of those at a time. I think that with being at a bigger agency right now, I have mostly retainer clients only, so I'm on anything from like 2 to 3 brands at a time, which I think is a very healthy amount at my level. As a VP, you're kind of expected to oversee things, but also execute here and there. But because you're kind of creating that strategy and then providing more of that strategic counsel, sometimes it's easier to handle more retainer clients at a time, whereas like someone who's maybe starting off in their career or midway through might be expected to be on fewer and do more, kind of like the day to day with moving things along in a campaign. But it really depends on the agency you're with.
Now, are there particular industries that you're working with, or do you see a full spread of all sorts of different clients?
There are two types of people in an agency. There's one where you've really only focused on one type of client for your entire career, and therefore you are truly an expert. And I think of people in like healthcare, for example, like that. We actually have a healthcare team at MSL, and I've worked with healthcare colleagues here and there throughout the years. And that's an industry where, because of the compliance, the regulations, and like you really have to understand that on like an expert, almost like academic level. Whereas with what I do, which is more consumer brands, so what I mean by that is like companies and products that you'd purchase from like in a store in your day-to-day life, it's a bit easier for me to kind of jump between different categories. And I've personally really loved working on travel, like when we did at Marriott. I've loved working on kitchen and home brands. That's definitely something that I love, just because I also love to use these products myself. I had quite a few clients in beauty in the past. One of my favorite ones was actually Estee Lauder, because I got to work on different brands within Estee Lauder. Those are kind of my favorite types of clients, actually, because you get to know the client, but then you have so many different ways in which the campaign can come to life, because you're touching so many different brands, and each brand is very typically unique from each other. Let's say you're working on 14 different Marriott brands, like hotel brands. If those 14 hotel brands were each different hotel parent companies, that would be crazy to try to understand them all, and you probably wouldn't be able to work on that many at once because of the competitiveness of it all. But by being able to work with like these umbrella companies, you really do get to touch different brands, and you get to understand their identities in a very like intimate way that allows you to kind of seamlessly work between those different brands.
Working in the brand world in any capacity, you start to realize that these parent umbrella companies that have a bunch of different brands, there are kind of some shared values and differentiating things about each product line. And so if you can grasp that, then you're in good shape for being able to work across a lot of different brands at one time once you understand those kind of key values and then differentiating factors. I did want to ask you too, you're working at the VP level now, which is really exciting, and I would love to hear how that has differed from some of your more junior roles and what you're doing day to day now versus what you may have been doing day to day in the past.
When you start off in your career, you have this idea of what VPs and leadership does. And I've found through the years and every stage, whether I was an account supervisor or, becoming a director and now a VP, like I feel like you realize that there are all these myths about what the role entails. And it's really funny because I see these, these interns that have started at our company or just gotten hired who look up to me, and it's weird that they're looking up to me, but I'm like, oh yeah, like when I was in their shoes, I guess I did look up to the VP or whoever it was. But I think that what's changed is, you're typically the first one who gets called if there is like an issue with, a campaign, or if you're running into hurdles with a contract with an influencer, for example. You're typically like the escalation point where maybe someone more junior has taken it to a place where they're like, okay, I've done what I can, but I need someone else to help me just get it to the finish line. And I actually really enjoy that about the role because I love problem solving, and I love being able to kind of think on my feet and come up with different options. I'm all about options, and I think options are always so important in so many things in life, but definitely what's kind of helped me, people often ask me like, what's your advice? And one of the things I say is think about options, because if you've got options, then you will land somewhere that works for everybody eventually. I learned a lot through managing other people as well, that there's certain things that are worth stressing about, and there are certain things that really aren't worth stressing about. Hindsight is 2020. That perspective has really helped me with a lot of what I need to do now with all of the problem solving that I do.
So, summing that up, and correct me if I am misrepresenting anything, but a lot more problem solving, a lot more strategic thinking, and you're the one that the buck stops at in terms of prioritizing, what you really need to work on, what you really need to address right now, what needs to be put on the back burner, and then also that element of managing people and finding a fine line between being a confidant and a problem solver, and also a leader.
Yeah, it's you also have to have that, like I like to say, 30,000-foot line of sight into everything that's going on, because as much as you need to be in the weeds and understand what's happening in those moments where you're kind of problem solving or working through something with a team member, you also have to be able to kind of zoom out and think, okay, but like with everything else going on today, this is done. Now we have to pivot to this other project because this is actually hotter than what we've just been talking about.
Now, walk me through a typical workday. What is happening from like the time you wake up? What time's your alarm going off? And then, yeah, when are you off the clock? What's your evening look like?
So I typically wake up around like 7. That's like a really good time for me to get up because I'm not groggy. It's not too early, but I can kind of take my time getting ready for work. I always say that the morning is like my me time. So I love having the time to catch up on emails before I go into the office if I'm going into the office. So I love having that morning time where I'm just kind of like catching up on emails, looking at my chats, and just kind of planning out the day ahead, moving things on my calendar if needed, having my first cup of coffee and breakfast. I do always have a breakfast because I think it's important. The thing about being a VP is that you are in a lot of meetings. I should have mentioned that before, but you are often needed in a lot of decision making calls. So I do have a lot of meetings, and then when I'm done with the meetings, I'm typically working on either a strategy deck or reviewing materials from my team, or again, like troubleshooting something, whether it's like figuring out staffing for a new account or working on new business. Because I am not really a morning person, sometimes I do end up working a bit later in the evening because that's when I find that the mornings and evenings are the time when like the Slack channels, the Teams channels have kind of quieted down for a bit. The emails have kind of slowed down for a bit. So if I'm working on a big deck, it's actually when I do my best work because I'm uninterrupted and I'm able to really get into it. So I do love having those moments every now and then when I can just kind of like dig into something, spend a good 2 hours. And so sometimes I do log off a little bit later than I'd like to admit, maybe like 8 p.m. sometimes, but that's more of a rarity than the norm. I usually try to go to a class a couple times a week after work. I don't like to get too into one type of workout. I've kind of tried it all with like Pilates or yoga or maybe a resistant band class. Like I kind of try it all. And then it's either, planning my wedding now, which is my like second job. Although we do have a planner, so thankfully we have help there. And then cooking something. I find cooking to be very therapeutic. So if I've had a really busy day, I love to put on a podcast and cook.
It sounds like you have a good balance of being at work, finding some time for yourself, and also taking a little bit of time to unwind.
I do think it's important because the one thing I've always told people I manage is you cannot burn out. If you get to a place where you feel like you might even be remotely burning out, it's already too late. So it's about setting the habits early on so that you don't get to a point where you're even at risk of getting into that phase.
And recognizing the seasonality of things again. If you have a season, I mean, occasionally, especially around the end of year, there's often a lot of planning that needs to happen for the next year, a lot of wrapping up old projects. And that's a time where there might be more 8 p.m. work days. But taking a good hard look at that, and rather than like digging in deeper and just pushing the gas, sometimes you need to take a step back. I know personally, like if I was starting to do that too often, I would occasionally just be like spending more time at my computer, getting less work done than if I were to take a break, go to a workout class, come back and revisit something later. Sometimes you just need to give yourself a little time to push pause.
Definitely agree with that. And it's the same thing with taking, a coffee walk in the middle of the day or taking a moment, like 5 minutes between your back to back meetings to just go use the bathroom and like have that moment to yourself. I think it's so important because we're only human. We can't be on all the time.
So, what do you do when you feel like you're getting to that point of getting close to burnout?
Working out has helped in terms of like micro habits that have changed my risk with burning out. I think that has actually been quite important because having something to go to that's timed, like a class after work, forces me to be like, all right, I'm hitting pause. I will be back later. But I also think that a lot of where I get my rejuvenation is from travel. I've always loved to travel and I've never been the manager who's like, you can't take your time off because I do think it's so important. So long as you are when you're working, if you are, meeting your goals, you're getting your work done, you're reliable. I think that's a really big part is like if you are trusted as an employee, if anyone's giving you a hard time about taking a break every now and then, like that's not okay. Now with also just the ability to work from home more often as a society, even though a lot of companies are moving back to the office and I have an office requirement myself too, it's still possible to fit in a bit more of a longer trip when you can kind of marry it with some remote days as well. So,
I'm in a course, a management course right now, and we just did a deep dive for a few weeks on hybrid versus in office work culture. And
mm,
there's so much research that suggests that hybrid really is the way to go. So I know there's a lot of companies that are really pushing for in office time, but the hybrid schedule really does allow, like you said, a little more flexibility for built-in breaks, but it also tends to allow more like deep focus time because there's stuff that you need to be in person for. There's stuff that is helpful to like see people and brainstorm. But that has been something that's been really reaffirmed to me the past few weeks. Now, living in New York is notoriously expensive, especially when you like to travel and when you have a family that is all over the world. Do you feel like your salary has always been enough to keep you comfortable?
no. Definitely not. I think when I first started, I remember so part of figuring out how to be your own person, and for me, it was very much like, I mean, my parents never had a corporate job, neither of them, and I love them dearly, but I got zero advice from them. So when I got my first offer at that job, where it was an internship that became a full time job, I remember getting the offer and thinking, what do I do? Like, I really want this, and I am obviously going to take it, right? But what do I do next? And I had to do a lot of research online and ask a lot of friends. I did get a few, friends who were very supportive who said, try to negotiate for it. Like what's there to lose? And mentally I was like, there's so much to lose. I can't not get this job. But I was like, all right, well, let's see maybe something reasonable. I remember it was such a sad starting salary, but I know a lot of people start with like the 30K range, and I think the offer was like 36 or $37,000, and I remember thinking like, okay, like that, I was doing the math and like I was never really good at budgeting when I first started off, but I was doing like, quick math in my head and I was like, that's just not gonna work. And so I did manage to negotiate and I got it to 42,000, I believe, which like at the time felt like a really big jump.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, when you start off, what they don't tell you is that like you often do have to kind of take on probably a lower salary than what you'd like if you are looking at agency life, at least, which is what I know. I do think that a lot of it comes with like the benefits that are not written in the dollar amount that you get. Like look at the healthcare that you get, look at the 401k that you get, look at all the other things that you might get, because it is truly a package. But because I was working at these boutique agencies for a while after that first job, boutique agencies often don't have as much of the structure in place to offer those other benefits. So I do feel that, if I were to go back and give myself advice, it would be prioritize the places that have a very good 401k, because it's no joke to have to save up for retirement. I think the older I've gotten, the more real that has been. And I always tell people who are younger than me, start now, because I've met so many people now who are, in their 20s and they're like, I'll save later. Retirement's so far away. And I'm like, yes, but just put it away now and it grows. So I think that I made it work. And again, like I swiped my credit card probably too many times when I was younger to make it work at times. But I'm very grateful with where I am now financially. I've been able to kind of learn those tough lessons.
So a lot of these a lot of jobs in like the marketing realm, you start off with a lower salary. And sometimes I think people will say, oh, well, you could just go to school for, 4 more years and be a doctor, or 3 more years and be, and yes. However, even some of those roles that have starting salaries that might be a little bit higher, a lot of times they're not actually that much higher in practice. And you have the added weight of school during that time, and the added expense of school during that time. And so I am noticing more and more as I'm like a little further down the road that it's not necessarily a bad thing to take a job that pays $40,000 right out of college, rather than pursuing continuing education to get a job with a higher starting salary, 3, 4, 8 years down the road.
No, everyone has to start somewhere and it's okay.
I know we've been talking for a while and we could chat all day long, but I would love to just hear a few more things from you. First of all, any like particularly memorable projects or campaigns or stories from all the cool work that you've done?
So one of the brands that I worked on when I was at one of my like mid-career agencies was Cointreau. It's the orange liqueur made in France, and it was my first true liquor brand that I worked on. And I had the opportunity to work on the brand when they were celebrating their 70th anniversary of the original margarita. If you go out there and look up the original margarita, there's a lot of debate around which one was original, but Cointreau was part of the original recipe that I believe was made in Acapulco, Mexico. It's like still, it's so ingrained in my head still, like years later. But I got to work on the campaign, and one of the elements was having a couple celebrities work with us, and We had an event where Tan France and Gigi Hadid showed up to celebrate with us because Anthony Porowski was one of our celebrity ambassadors for the campaign. And he actually created an original spicy margarita recipe that we shot and used in social media content, but then also pitched to editors. It was a huge success. And I remember I was in Anthony Porowski's Brooklyn apartment at the time. I'm sure he's moved on to a even bigger place. Yeah, and he was so sweet. He offered to make us all a drink, and I just thought it was so awesome that he was so normal. It really felt like I was just invited to a friend's apartment. Having been in the industry for a while, I feel like you do meet all types of people, and it's just you are so grateful when you meet people who are just down to earth like him. I also really loved working on a couple different campaigns when I was at this agency too for Moleskin. Moleskin was actually the first account that I worked on where I had an opportunity to work on owned social, and which was a whole new thing for me. And that was really exciting because I, at the time, was very focused on PR. So I knew how to pitch stories, but I didn't quite know how to translate that into social media posts. That's actually where I started to work more with influencers too, because Moleskin had a login to an influencer platform that I ended up working at later called For. And so I ended up using that platform myself firsthand as a user and understanding how brands source creators. So, and obviously working on the Marriott campaigns. I mean, how can I not mention those? It's just so much fun. Having grown up in different places, working on an international brand and campaign was really important to me. So to be able to work on such a global brand like Marriott and send influencers to so many exciting places that I wish I could have gone to myself, but now I'll just have to make that into my bucket list for places to go next.
I wish that we could go down your whole client list of all of the cool brands that you've worked for, but A, we wouldn't have time for that, and of course, I wanna make sure that we're not violating any NDAs, but if you're listening, just know that Ari is one of the coolest people who's worked with a lot of really, really cool brands and creators if you haven't gathered all of that, already. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. I would love to know, just thinking holistically about your life, like, what does success look like to you?
I've been in this chapter of agency life for a while. I would like to stay in it a bit longer for sure. But I do think that it would be really fun to reinvent myself in some shape or form, maybe in another 10 years from now, and do something completely different. I've always said that I've wanted to have my own business. Now, what that business is the big question. I've been really loving the idea of something in travel, but not so much, hospitality, more so like giving people the experience of connecting with people from other places and learning different cultures, whatever that may be in terms of a business in the future. I've also been toying with the idea of, well, I've always wanted to write and I've always wanted to write books. And so it would be really fun just for fun, not even to get a book deal, but just for fun to write a novel. I've also been surprised by how much I've loved planning this wedding. So I've been wondering if there's something there with like a wedding planning business of sorts in the future too. I think, yeah, I've never been someone who believes in like 5-year plans because life just changes so much, and I think it's important to be open to different possibilities.
No, that's amazing. It sounds like, a lot of your success is measured by um, being able to pursue things that you feel like you're called to. And when you're
Yeah.
able to do that and I don't know, just find success and joy in it, what a wonderful thing.
And I like seeing other people, flourish in their careers too. Like now that I'm, older in my career, I feel like I've been able to see, the next generation rise up to the top. And that's something that I'm very much a fan of too, is mentorship. And I had really great mentors when I was starting off in my career, and I just love doing that for other people too.
This is why I had you on the show today because you were such a cheerleader for everybody. I love being able to work with you. I felt like you always found such a balance between being warm and kind and also really being able to get business done and be reliable and be firm. And I am just so grateful to have learned from you today and learned a little bit more about your story and your career. And I can't wait to see where things take you next.
Thank you so much, Katie. It was such a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the 100 Jobs Project. You can find us on Instagram at 100 Jobs Project. A few things you can do to help the show is leave us a review, a little 5-star, and subscribe. So thank you for that. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another episode. Take care.